Hey guys, I'm here with John Linneman from Digital Foundry. How's it going, man?
Pretty good. How about you?
Not bad. Did I say your last name right? Because I'm terrible
You
at
did.
that.
You did indeed. Perfect.
Awesome, awesome. So, man, you Digital Foundry certainly covers a lot of ground. I don't even really know where to start. I guess would you just talk a little bit about what Digital Foundry is for the viewers that aren't familiar with your work or aren't as familiar?
Sure. Of course. Yeah. So we're kind of a website slash YouTube channel that kind of focuses on, I guess, the technical side of game analysis in a way. It's kind of a niche topic, I guess, but there seems to be a lot of people interested in it. So we found a pretty decent audience doing it.
Yeah.
And in addition to, so that covers things like looking at how games run as well as the basic is like things like resolution and whatnot. But really, I try to go beyond that and really explore like what goes into making these games as best as I can. Try to help. You know, people designing the games, they get the reviews on launch day about the game, but I kind of want to review the tech side of things in a way. So essentially showing how well did these guys do in creating this game and what did they have to do to make it happen. Because I think there's a lot of interesting stories there.
Yeah,
And then
absolutely.
on top of that, then I started that DF Retro series. So,
Mhm.
because I think my real passion is in the retro stuff. So, yeah, I try to do that when I can.
So,
It's been,
one of the things that has been bugging me that I'm not sure if your channel's touched upon yet, and I've only got a couple hours into it myself. Since you're talking about the way the games run, different resolutions,
hmm
have you guys done any research as to what consoles or even game specific do you run at different resolutions, especially when you're going into something like a 4K TV? So, if you have a Wii U or a PS3 or anything, you don't have a 4K option, so no matter what, you're doing upscaling.
yeah, exactly. I think for the in that situation, I kind of set it to the maximum supported resolution, right? So like say the Switch, that doesn't do 4K, but it does plenty of games that are 1080p. So you're naturally going to want to set it to 1080p, even if, if it's like say a 900p game, there's not going to be any integer scaling happening along the way, but you're still going to get the best overall picture than if you just went with 720p. Whereas on the Wii U, I actually tend to think uh, that depends a little bit on the scalar quality in your TV, but
Hmm.
usually, for the Wii U, I set mine to 720p because, well, I'd say 99% of the games are 720p only, outside of something like Rayman Legends, which
Hmm.
does 1080p, and maybe a couple others like Smash. But the majority of the games are 720p or lower. And same with like Xbox 360 and the like. You just kind of so you're kind of limiting the number of times that it has to scale the image. You know what I mean? So
Exactly.
it's like, all right, the game is 720p, it outputs 720p, and then you let your TV do the rest. So,
No, the one thing
although,
that I
yeah,
noticed on the Switch, which kind of maybe it was like I said, I only have an hour or two into this, but I did test with the DSLR, so the Switch in 720p through my 4K OLED, and then the exact same thing. I just switched it over to 1080p, and then I zoomed in on a part where there was no movement, and it's without a doubt sharper in 1080p. But there
yeah.
were a few parts of that game where, especially in the forest, where everything slows down really bad. Where
Oh,
when I
and
was
Zelda?
running it, yeah, when I'm running it at 720p, and the frame rate was much higher even in that. So that's always the
Yep.
trade-off. Would I care about that extra softness if I have a higher frame rate because it's going to 4K anyway?
That's kind of the eternal question, I guess, especially in the PC gaming world where it's like you're trading resolution versus performance.
Hmm.
And you're right, some games on some consoles do actually render at a lower resolution when you select a lower resolution. That's not always true. Like on PlayStation 4, for instance, if you set it to 480p or 720p, it's still rendering internally at whatever the actual game resolution is, so you don't gain anything. But I know on PS3, and I guess in the case of the Switch there, if you set it to a lower resolution, you might actually get a lower rendering resolution and thus faster performance. So it's kind of up to you, I think, in that case. It's what's more valuable.
See, that stuff's pretty fascinating to me. Is there a repository somewhere where people could like put in the console and the game and see if just match that up to
I
their
I love that idea actually, but no, I don't think there is.
yeah.
What I've actually been fiddling lately with PlayStation 3 on a PVM
Hmm.
because I find a lot of PS3 games, especially the ones that run poorly, if you drop them down to 480p, they run way better. It's unbelievable. Like Bionic Commando Rearm 2 is a great one. It's like 45 frames per second. It's not very smooth in 720p mode, but you go to 480 and it's a buttery smooth 60 frames per second.
That is
And
awesome.
it works. You lose some of the detail, but I think, when playing on a CRT, it kind of smooths over some of that anyway, and it kind of winds up looking better in some ways, and it
Yeah,
runs better. So it's a fair trade-off.
I actually have a bunch of Twitch streamer friends that hunted down those widescreen BVMs. The
Oh yeah,
32
yep,
inch are almost impossible to find, but they tracked down the 24. And it's always that, like, do I need to drop 2 grand on this? Is this something I
yep.
need? And every single one of them, as soon as they get it home and plug it in, all of them just go, "Oh, I'm using this for everything now." So
Yeah, they look amazing. Yeah, I
yep.
saw a friend of mine got a 32-inch recently, and the thing is as deep as a table. It's unbelievably how it's so big. But
Where did he
man,
find one?
oh, so we're here in Germany. A company in Frankfurt. Well, I live in Frankfurt, so there was a company that did like ads and presentations for consumers, and they put it up on sort of the German equivalent of Craigslist.
Hmm.
I think they wanted €1,000 for it,
It's an
which was not
awesome
too
deal.
bad. And he went and he got it, and yeah, it's amazing looking.
I got
I
mine
was
right
blown away.
at the tail end. So
Oh,
back when, like, there was a long period of time where people were paying people to get rid of CRTs because they
I
needed to make
know.
room. And I came
Yeah,
in at the tail end of that where they started to realize, hey, people can actually still buy these. So didn't get mine for very much, but ever since the first time I've showed it on camera, I've gotten offers for it all the time. And it's funny
I'm sure.
because one just sold in Brooklyn for 5 grand last summer that was broken. It needed work. So
Whoa,
it's funny.
man.
A lot of times I have people emailing me, and some of them are hilarious. Like, I live in the area. I could come and pick it up right now, and I could offer you $300 for that monitor. Yeah, take a hike, go jump out a window.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I don't know.
Dude,
I
that's awesome.
absolutely love it, and unless somebody actually sees it and really experiences it, it's hard to describe because on the one hand, yes, it's a huge CRT. You could never get the geometry flawless.
Right,
It's
right.
massive and heavy. But when you're like I was watching. I think I had the Knight Rider Blu-ray, and I
Oh,
was watching
nice.
one of those episodes on it, and I just kept going back and forth like, do I want it in 480p or 720? Like, I'm like, it really blew my mind because when watching it on a flat screen, you see too much. You know what I mean? So it
Yeah,
was like
yeah,
the
yeah, yeah. I
perfect
know what you
happy
mean.
medium. Yeah, so it's anybody that has a chance to game even newer
Mm.
consoles on those,
Oh,
grab
I
one.
agree. It looks awesome. You're right. Even if you're running at a lower resolution, technically, it's so smooth. And I think people forget that CRTs are designed to handle, whatever resolution you throw at it.
Mhm.
You're not stuck with a fixed pixel grid as we are in modern TVs, and I think that makes all the difference. You just can't get that kind of look on an LCD or any other modern television.
Yeah,
So yeah, I'm all about that, man. That's a good one.
absolutely. Man, I really maybe I could try to work out some way to put some kind of create some kind of database for those though, because that is something that plagues myself and a lot of my friends. And for me, it's nothing more than an annoyance. But for the Twitch
Yeah.
streamers, that's a big deal, especially if they're speedrunners. If you
Mhm.
drop frame rates and something, so that's cool.
Yeah, no, it's good info for sure. I've been kind of going through my library on PS3 and just figuring out what benefits, and I was surprised at how many games actually benefit a lot. They just play so much better at 480p. So it's worth checking out.
Yeah, definitely. So, the DF Retro stuff. Obviously, a lot of
Yeah,
people are going to notice you from the My Life in Gaming PS2 video that just came out.
that's right.
What other stuff? What other work have you been doing with that?
So I started that up about a year and a half ago, and for a while it was weekly, and then it went bi-weekly, and it's mostly bi-weekly, though I've been a little bit late lately because of the Xbox One X, so that happens. But essentially, what the original idea was, it's a combination of things. One, it's a celebration of older games in a way, like really like reflect back on what made them great, what the developers went through to make it, and sort of the history behind them, just to paint that in. And then the other part of that is essentially comparing all the different ports. Because I've always been fascinated by, like, back then especially, they had so many different developers working on the same game in terms of title, but the different versions were often so different that just seeing how they implemented those changes on each console and got them to work, I found really interesting. So I decided to kind of cover that.
Yeah,
So
that's something that absolutely fascinates me. And nowadays it's a completely different, especially when you're talking about old games to newer consoles. At least back then, no one was using a Genesis emulator on a Super Nintendo. Like they had to redo
Exactly.
the whole game. But nowadays, I'm always wondering, like, is the game rebuilt? Is it just running on an emulator? Is it, if it's a newer game, is it just using an engine that could easily be ported to different platforms? Easily meaning it's still a ton of work, but way easier than rewriting it from scratch type of thing. So,
Exactly. And then the other thing, I guess recently I've kind of gotten into doing console episodes. Like I don't know if you saw it, but I did an episode on 32X where
no, I didn't.
I went through, I did a two-parter. It was about an hour and 40 minutes long total, and I covered every single game on the 32X from A to Z and essentially stacked them all up against the comparable ports and analyzed those that didn't have ports to kind of get an idea of essentially what took advantage of the 32X, like what techniques were even available on the 32X and that kind of stuff. Just, and I'm going to be doing that again with the Atari Jaguar, but
So
maybe
the
not every game, like 50 of them.
Yeah. So well, at least hold out for the new Jaguar ROM carts so you could have them all,
Yeah,
all in one thing. But
yeah.
the thing that got me about the 32X is the first time I took one apart. I kind of stopped and went,
Oh,
"Did somebody hack this?" And
it
then
looks so hacked.
I've never seen something come from the manufacturer that looks so bad. Every one of them is covered in glue and goop and has jumper wires and it legit looks like something that my old company would have made as a prototype. I mean
Oh
that's
no.
that is
Oh, okay, yeah,
100% like yeah, that is totally like all right, well manufacturing run number 1 didn't go exactly as planned, so let's just sever these connections, put these jumper wires, tack them down with glue, and we'll send them to our partners just to review and then get them back and throw them out so the public doesn't ever see something like this. Apparently Sega just said glue it up, send it out.
Well, hey, it was Dojin Dance's first job. What are you gonna do, right? I mean, it's
That's
hot glue
awesome.
city in there. Oof.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
hysterical. I mean, I'm absolutely gonna watch the episode, but is there any spoilers you can give us? Like, is there a, dare I say, hidden gem for the 32X, or is it?
Well, first of all, one of the technical things I discovered is how few games really take full advantage of it. Like,
Yeah.
Knuckles Chaotix, for instance. So one of the things I did in the episode was essentially split the video signal so I could show independently just the 32X and just the Mega Drive or slash Genesis side. And you could see what a lot of games are doing. And like in Knuckles Chaotix, like all of the backgrounds are handled by the Genesis only.
Hmm.
And then the 32X just handles sprites.
But isn't
So
that the case for almost all of the games, though? The
uh,
Genesis does all the backgrounds, and the
that's
32X does the foregrounds.
to a degree, but I found a surprising number of 3D games where they pretty much render everything on the 32X.
Oh yeah.
But yeah. So like, what's the name of it? There's this one of the space games. I'm drawing a blank on it. It has the sequel on Saturn. Um,
Not the
dang.
Star Wars one.
No, well, actually, Star Wars is one of them. Actually,
Oh.
well, I think Star Wars has a little bit done on the Genesis, but there's another one, and I'll have to look it up. But
Dark
it's
Side
the
or something.
well, actually, yeah, Dark Side is one of them.
Oh.
And that doesn't use the Genesis at all. It's pretty much just um, Shadow Squadron. That's what I'm thinking of. So
Gotcha.
Shadow Squadron, which is a really good game, by the way. Shadow Squadron and Dark Side both pretty much use just the 32X. Like if you boot it without the 32X, you literally just get the Sega logo and then it just freezes there. It never clears it from memory. So it just kind of, so it's really is using the hardware well, and it looks pretty impressive for the system.
Hmm.
But the main thing I discovered is that the 32X is just there's two SH2 CPUs in there, right? Same CPUs from the Saturn, just clocked a little lower, but it doesn't really have much in the way of any sort of graphical processing capabilities. It's all software driven on the CPUs, which means it doesn't have any tile and sprite acceleration.
Hmm.
So 2D games are kind of hard to do on the 32X. So case in point, Pitfall the Mayan Adventure, right? I mean, it's just a Sega CD Genesis SNES game. That divides it up. The parallax background is powered by the Genesis, and it runs at 60 frames per second. But the foreground is 256 colors instead of the 64, which looks great, but it runs at 20 to 30 frames per second at best.
Oh,
And
geez.
that's powered by the 32X. So you have this weird mismatch where the foreground is really choppy and the background is really smooth. and it just looks awful. And I saw that in several games that were trying to be 2D on the 32X, where it's just like the 32X powered 2D backgrounds ran really, really poorly because the system is just not fast enough to do it well.
Hmm.
So it just seems like a really kind of a poor design, in my opinion, in that sense. It's really not made to do good 2D despite the expanded color palette.
Now, did you notice any video interference when using the 32X?
So, yes, so I have two pass-through cables for it. And I actually got one of the pass-through cables from Retro Gaming Cables.
Mm-hmm.
And theirs does a pretty good job of avoiding most of the interference. The image is completely clean with it, and the audio is almost completely free of buzz. Now, the stock one that came with the system introduces a ton of line noise into the mix, and
Yep.
it's awful. If you just plug straight into the Genesis, it's so super clean signal, but you plug into that, and it's just like Buzz City, which drove me nuts. So yeah, the default cable Sega shipped with it is not good.
No, no, and if you go from a Genesis 1, the default cable doesn't even have audio in it.
That's right. I forgot about that. Yeah, I'm using it on a Genesis 2, but yes,
Yeah, I think I
it's
have
kind
it.
of a mess. You have it right there.
Coincidentally, I actually just received this in the mail today, and I'm going to be redoing all of my tests for that. But this is
Nice.
a pack-a-punch version, what they call it. So it's a fully shielded, and I always get mine. I don't know if you can see. No, I'm going to open it up
I
anyway.
see. I
So,
see. Yeah, I got the Pack-a-Punch one as well. Yeah.
so the trick that I always do is I have this going into the Genesis 1 with a
Yep.
very short little pigtail, and then this goes to the headphone jack.
Yep.
So essentially, this
Beautiful.
turns your Genesis 1 into a Genesis 2, and then you just deal with Genesis 2 cables from then on. But I want to try it with the fully shielded version, and I want to try a few more things, because the testing I did last year with the RGB modded and RGB not modded, bypassed Genesis. They all do RGB by default.
Right.
What I found was that the Genesis was putting out a crystal clear signal. And then sometimes when I was using the 32X, only the 32X overlays had weird interference. And
Yep.
sometimes,
Exactly.
but not always, I would get it on the Genesis side. So I guess that means if you really want to go crazy and the 32X is your favorite little mushroom console, then you would actually have to do mods on that too to improve the video quality. So it's a little nuts, but that's going to be one of my little spare time OCD things, just to try to mod a
Yeah. Yeah.
32X and see what I
I
can get to
mean,
look like.
for me, I just like to keep it connected to the Model 2 system out of sheer convenience. So having the degraded signal was really annoying, and you're right. So finding a way to perfect the 32X just so you can keep it connected is kind of appealing.
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
in fact, that's, the reason I use that little pigtail cable that I showed you is because I always recommend that people don't leave their 32X connected all the time. And
ah,
also because if you ever want to play Virtua Racing or a
oh
Master
yeah.
System game, you have to take it off anyway. So,
Oh yeah, yeah. No, I have a Model One Genesis with the really good sound as well hooked up. I just
oh
keep
yeah, then perfect.
so my Model Two is the one that has a Model Two Sega CD and the 32X connected at the same time, and that's
Mhm.
just kind of the convenient everything system. And then I have my
Yeah.
Model One, which I use if I want the best sound and it's so yeah, I kind of use them both.
Yeah, I tried to keep I got rid of all my extras because I was just collecting so much stuff. But extras for me is different than extras for normal people. I need
Yeah,
one of each major revision of the consoles now. So for SNES, I have the original two chip, a one chip, and a mini. For the Genesis, the original one with the great sound, a two, a three, and I think I have a CDX. That's a whole other project.
nice.
But in the testing that I've done so far. The Genesis one, you could either just do the composite cut or use Voltar's upcoming board, and because the sound's already perfect, so use its own encoder, everything it just looks crystal clear. But for everything else, the new board that Renee was designing that has a bypass and an audio amp in it, and a new connector for other models and stuff. So it's yeah, you
That's
need to do a
excellent.
lot of work if you need flawless Genesis output. You're gonna need to do some work on it no matter what.
For sure.
I haven't even touched 32X. I hope it's as easy as just lifting up the pin for composite video so it doesn't interfere, but
Oh, I hope
we'll
so.
see.
I'll be keeping an eye on that.
Yeah. I'm when you said you're doing all these ports, I'm just thinking like of all the times I've seen different games on different consoles. And I had a chance to borrow a ROM cart for Jaguar a few years ago, and I just spent
Ah, yes.
2 minutes with each title just out of curiosity. And at first glance, so 15 minutes of gameplay, I actually really liked Rayman for the Jaguar. So
Yeah.
I'm really interested in when that upcoming video of yours hits, that what your opinion is on that versus like the PlayStation 1 port.
Yeah, I mean, I can spoil a little bit of that already if you like.
Oh, hell yeah.
Because so I have actually looked a lot into Rayman, and it is a nice game on the Jag, but they did make some cuts versus the other versions, namely the parallax backgrounds. On the Jag, the background is consolidated into a single layer. So you have the background that's flat, then you have your foreground that you play on, and then sometimes they have something, another foreground layer with like leaves and stuff in front of the player. And those are basically your three parallax layers. On PlayStation, Saturn, and the PC, however, those backgrounds are consist of maybe 5 or 6 independent layers that all scroll. So it's to give it that extra depth effect. It's not line scrolling, but the most distant trees will scroll at one speed. The ones a little bit closer scroll at a different speed, and so on, so that you get more depth in the background. And basically that's absent in the Jag version. So the
Huh.
Jag just has simplified parallax scrolling. And then, of course, it doesn't have the CD audio soundtrack, which I think the soundtrack was really good with the CD, and on the Jag standard, it's just okay.
Hmm.
So between the two, it's kind of a loss, but at the same time, it's still really good on the Jag. So, and there's no loading; it's just instant. So you just hop in, you go, and it feels great.
Yeah,
So
cartridge games,
yeah,
no loading time is always nice. So,
exactly.
in a situation like Jaguar or PlayStation, it was you would have to redo the game. You wouldn't be able to just emulate it from one to the other, correct?
No, no, you're right. Back then, especially, everything had to be written primarily in like, machine code or some other low-level language and all that. It was, I guess, on PlayStation that you started to see more high-level stuff with some of the development environments available, but in general, you were writing pretty low-level code. And also, the way PlayStation and Saturn and Jaguar and all them worked was very, very different. So like the PlayStation for 2D, it draws everything in these tiny 8 or 16 pixel squares, which consist of two triangles. And you essentially map a texture onto that, and that becomes your pixel art. And you do that for sprites and tiles. They're all drawn in that way, but they're not like transformed or shaded or lit or anything. So they're really, really fast. So essentially, you're just building the whole scene. Everything you see on screen is just a whole bunch of triangles with 2D textures on it, basically. And Saturn can do that too with VDP1. But the second VDP, I'm sure you're familiar with, is designed specifically for 2D tile-based acceleration, and that works more like a traditional 16-bit system. And so Saturn games typically combine the two because, VDP1's a little bit weaker than the PlayStation's GTE by itself, but when you combine the two, you can do some pretty amazing things on Saturn. So, and of course the Jag does traditional tile and sprite-based work as well. So they all kind of work differently. So you're right. You had to write games specific to the platform every time.
Hmm. So
So
people that were
yeah,
really into like Tempest 2000, if you don't want to have to buy a Jaguar, a Tempest, and a spinner controller, you can just get the PlayStation version. And I think there is some kind of custom spinner thing that you could make for that. I think for the PlayStation version.
I'll have to check that. I just got the controller for the Jag with the spinner on it, and that thing's pretty sweet.
Yeah, I remember playing Tempest on the Jaguar a while back and thinking like, oh, this is neat. Reminds me of like a better version of the arcade. And then when I bought the spinner controller, I sat there
Yep.
and I'm like, all right, well, this was great. This was a lot more fun. And I looked up and an hour had gone by. I'm like,
Yeah.
whoa, that totally
Yeah.
changes the game right
It's
here.
a
You're just
completely
sucked right
different
in.
game. It's amazing.
Yeah, I absolutely
I
love
love
it.
that.
So,
Yeah.
and at the moment, that is, my cousin just picked up a Jag and the spinner controller and Tempest just for that reason. And I gotta say, if you love that game, that's a worthy $200 to get all that stuff. So,
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I was just at the European Jag Fest a couple weeks back, actually, if you can believe it. There's actually an entire festival dedicated to Jag.
were there
It's
like
pretty.
13 people there, or was it pretty decent?
It was pretty decent,
Huh.
and well, it consists of a lot of people doing a lot of homebrew stuff, right? So a lot of
Yeah.
homebrew games and coding, and some people were showing off some new options for doing like SD card loading. Like some guy made one that plugs into the second controller port on the system, but it requires the skunk board.
Oh,
But the idea is that you leave the skunk board connected. You don't even have to connect it to a computer or anything. You just plug it into the cartridge slot, put the SD reader in, and when you boot the Jag, it goes to the menu. And it basically just pulls data from controller port 2, loads it into the second ROM bank on the skunk board, and then bam, you're playing the game.
very
So
cool.
it's a completely different approach to the SD solution on the Jag, but it worked. I saw it in action. I thought it was really neat.
That
So
is cool. I love stuff like that. I remember as a kid the heated debate is Jaguar really 64-bit or not, because it's at the 232. You remember that stuff from all of that
yeah,
game
yeah.
magazines? And it's funny because nowadays if you talk to a kid and ask how many bits the Xbox is, they're like, "What are you talking about? Who cares?"
The real answer is 64-bit.
Yep. Yep.
So, but yeah, that's funny. The bit wars are officially over.
Oh yeah. So you just
Oh
got the
man.
Xbox One X. What do you think of it so far? A big upgrade from the rest?
Yes, I'm impressed with it. It's a good machine. And depending on where you come from, it's a bigger improvement than, so if you're an Xbox One owner,
Hmm.
the Xbox One is notoriously underpowered and regularly runs games even below 1080p.
Hmm.
It's not a fast machine. So if you're an Xbox player and you come to the Xbox One X, it's a night and day difference. It's basically a generational leap
Hmm.
because now you're looking at just about every game I've tested, they're all pretty much over 1440p, and a lot of them are actually at native 4K. So
Hmm.
it's pretty impressive. And in that sense, if you're coming from like a PS4 or PS4 Pro, it's still a sizable jump. I mean, a little bit less so, but you're still looking at something that puts out an image that's not too far off from a PC. So
Gotcha.
I've and it's really well built, I should say. The console itself is very dense. You look inside, and the thing is just it's a tank. It is actually the heaviest Xbox that's ever been made. So
Really?
heavier than the original, but
Okay.
it's but that's the thing. It's the heaviest, but it's the smallest. So you can imagine how dense it is in there. It's a really neatly engineered piece of equipment, I gotta say. So it feels very sleek. It's fast. It's a nice looking box. And it seems like if you play multi-platform games and you want some of the Microsoft stuff as well, it's like probably the best way to go right now in terms of sheer power.
Hmm.
And I guess what I appreciate is that it feels now like Microsoft's trying. So you remember Sony in 2006, they were back into that they thought that they were the kings of the world, and they launched the PS3. They had that, like, they come out there strutting $599 US, and everybody kind of took them down a peg for it. And
Yeah.
they had to crawl back to the top. It took a long time for them, but they got there. Now maybe they're starting to act a little differently again. I feel like with the Xbox One X, that's where Microsoft was. They were like totally full of themselves on it,
Hmm.
and then they kind of got dinged for it. And you look at the team in there now, and you really get the impression that they are really trying. Like, they want to get back there. They're hungry to make good software and good hardware again. And it just, it takes time, but I think they're getting there. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, so I just got the S last week because I really
Okay.
just needed an Ultra HD Blu-ray player, and I figure why am I
Oh
going to
yeah. Why
spend
not?
150 on a player when I could spend 160 on an Xbox that is a player?
Oh
So,
yeah. Exactly. Of course.
and I really like I played a bunch of PS3 games, but I actually preferred to play them on a hacked PS3. So I own the 3 or 4 games I actually play, but most of them are download. So I still get a long loading time. And I
Mhm.
used to always make the joke of, like, people used to complain about Neo Geo CD. What about the PlayStation 3? It's worse. But then when I got this, it was 1,000 times worse. I put in Mortal Kombat. It was 45 minutes for it to download
Uh
content and to rip
yes.
from the CD. So at that point, why wouldn't I just, like, do you get that much faster loading times if you just buy it digitally and it's all on the hard drive? Or is it all the same?
Well, I mean, the main thing is the installation, right? Because everything has to be run from the hard drive. So you're either waiting on it to download from the internet or you're waiting for it to install from the disk. And they both take a very long time, especially these days. And I feel like once it's installed, I mean, the loading time should be pretty quick, I think. Did you
Yeah,
find that to be the case?
I didn't get a chance to play it. I played one
See,
match and
that
then had to turn it off because my 45 minutes that I had free was taken up.
Yeah. No, I mean that's kind of a sticking point, I think, with modern console games, is that because of the needs of data transfer rates and everything, you can't really run a game from a disk anymore. It's just not feasible.
Right. So I'm starting to think, what's the
So,
point of discs even? Because I have one. There's probably no way you could see it here, but it does not have
well,
a single scratch on it. There's nothing wrong with it. There are no chips missing, and this one won't run at all. It says, "Please clean your disk." It's
really?
like, why? I'm always fighting for physical media. How important it is, and how once
Yeah,
these
same
stores
here.
shut down, then what are we gonna do? But if you require to put the disc in and have a download, and what the hell's the point anyway?
Do you have a PS4, by the way?
I don't know.
Because I have found that that's actually one of the biggest weaknesses on the Xbox platform, especially on the older non-X versions, is that disk installation is really slow.
Hmm.
I found on PS4 it's a lot faster.
Oh wow. Okay.
And now some games take advantage of this by essentially very rapidly putting a portion of the game on the hard drive and then letting you start it within like a minute or two. But then during that time, the loading times will be a little bit slower because it's both allowing you to play the game but also installing stuff to the hard drive. So you're basically playing while it installs.
Seems
Some
like a good
games,
idea.
yeah, and some games like open world games typically make you wait until it's fully installed anyway before you can really do much because like they need the world there. So
Hmm.
you just have to wait. But it generally is faster. And again, I found on Xbox One X, it is a little faster than it was on the S, but you're still that first time commitment. So what I do basically when I get a new game is just like I'll just run up, put it in the drive when I have other stuff to do, and then just walk away, and then by the time I'm ready to actually play it, it's ready.
Yeah, that's
'Cause-
that's pretty much what I'm gonna do from now on anyway. So
So yeah, it sucks though because it does take away the immediacy of console games that you once had. You can't just pull a disc off the shelf that you haven't played in a while and just play it. You got to wait.
mhm. And one of the other things I noticed, which I'm sure is everybody complains about, I had a disc of the Xbox 360 arcade class or Capcom arcade classics. So it had that Street Fighter 2 HD remix on it, which I thought was kind of cool.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I put the disc in, and it said, it's compatible, and it's having me download the versions from it. But I guess because it was a compilation, out of the 6 games on there, only 3 were compatible with Xbox One. So
Oh,
I wasn't
interesting.
able to use it. And then, I'm also
Hmm.
wondering, like, because it's a 360 port, how good is the emulation on that? Is it really just, is it slow?
So I will say this: the emulation work that they've done on the system is some of the best I've ever seen.
Oh, wow.
Uh, because it actually is so fast and so good that it pretty much solves every performance issue in any Xbox 360 game.
Hmm. Wow.
And they've even in the last week or so they've actually went even further. So they've started introducing a new version of that for specific games, and they're slowly rolling them out that allow the rendering resolution to increase. So Gears of War 3, Halo 3, Mirror's Edge, Skate 3, and a few others like Oblivion's, Fallout 3 in them.
Hmm.
They play at native 4K on the Xbox One X.
Wow. So you actually get
And
better performance while using their
so
emulation.
you get a
Huh.
better frame rate and you get a full, like the resolution is like massively increased. It's like a 5x increase. Like it's not scaling anymore. It's actually like running at native 4K. And in some cases, like in the case of Halo 3 and Mirror's Edge, they were able to use the lighting buffer to do HDR. So you can play Halo 3 at 4K with HDR using your 360 disc, and it runs better than it did on the original console.
That is incredible.
And
And
it's
what a
just like,
change from the history of things, right?
yeah, it's like it's completely different. And so, from what I understand, the only real limitation right now, I mean, is so they do have to do a wrapper for each game to ensure compatibility, which makes sense. But the main issue is licensing. So, like racing games, I've been wanting Project Gotham on there. Some
Hmm.
PGR would be great, but the car and music licenses actually make that really difficult for them. Because of the way licenses were negotiated in the past, Microsoft cannot legally just put out support for these old discs. They can't do it. And it really stinks.
Yeah, I kind of have a love and hate relationship with that because, when you buy a game and there's supposed backward compatibility, you want to use it. But I do see, and I've seen firsthand, the way the industry works now, how people end up getting screwed on all of their content. And it's
That's
really,
true. That's
it
true.
it just it sucks. So I understand You know, especially if it's especially with music, and if it's music that's not coming from a billionaire, right? You know, if Jay
Yeah,
Z's song
yeah.
gets ripped off, I don't really feel that bad. But if it's somebody that's making a middle class living on their music, and you know, their next thing you know, big giant Microsoft re-enables that for the next console, it's like, well, hey, I
Yeah,
just
no,
lost $100,000.
yeah, I get it.
So
I get it too. It's a tricky situation for sure.
yeah,
So I understand all the different sides of it and why it takes the time it does, but I'm happy that they're actually doing the legwork to make it happen. So that's good on them.
absolutely, yeah. So what do you think of the this ESRB thing for download games on disc?
I'm not a big fan of that, to be honest. That is really try. It feels like it's trying to stick it to the little guy, so to speak,
Yeah.
in a way that I don't. I just don't understand. I mean, and because I don't think a lot of developers or smaller labels can actually afford to pay this, which essentially means that those releases may not happen at all. So whatever little they make from this, presumably, if it's a little, it might be a lot. I don't know, but they're essentially shortchanging the market now,
Hmm.
and I don't like the now. It's correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it is sort of an opt-in thing still, so you can still release a game without the ESRB label, but that obviously limits to where you can sell it. So like limited run games, for instance, they should be okay, right? Because they just sell through their own label. But I'm not sure if they're affected by this.
Well, I see. I read one very long article about it, and then I did a little bit more research, but I think I might have interpreted some of that wrong, because the way I took it is the ESRB stuff. It's required by like Target, Walmart, big retailers,
Right. Yes.
and sometimes or Nintendo requires it. So I think for limited run games, if
Oh,
they
they're
make
getting the
a Switch
Nintendo.
game, yeah, they need the ESRB rating. I don't know how it'll affect PS4 and Xbox, but at the same time, once again, I might be completely wrong, but I was under the impression that if you sell a game on the store, on the digital store, you need
Yeah.
to get the ESRB rating as well. Is that
That's I think that is true. And in the past, I guess what it was is you could carry that over if you did a retail release. So if you already got the ESRB rating digitally and you wanted to do a physical release later, it was no extra charge, basically, from what I understand. And now
gotcha?
they essentially want to double dip on developers here.
And that's my interpretation of it. And you know, a bunch of people told me I was wrong, but I don't. They also then didn't provide the correct information, so
Right.
I
So
don't.
you're
You
right.
know,
It's still a little unclear for me right now because there's not too much great info on it out there other than what's been released. But it sounds to me like they're essentially want to double dip. So we'll see. I
yeah.
hope that's not true.
Now
But
in the U.S., actually all over the world, if you sell electronics products, you know it's an official retail thing. You need to get them certified.
of
And there's
course,
three different places that I know of, ULC and one other in the U.S. that you could go through to do that. And I've been through. I mean, I've spent an unfortunate amount of hours in an EMI chamber doing medical field testing for this stuff for medical grade products. And while I'm sure there's annoying bureaucracy, and while yes, it costs. I mean, it was like 100 grand to have something certified medical grade. When
wow,
you're sitting in those chambers and you're seeing the tests they're doing, it is very obvious why you're doing those tests. You know, somebody's cell phone goes off and, you know, the meters go off. I mean, it is a safety thing. And
sure,
I totally get it. And
I
in
get that
many,
too.
many cases, it's annoying and unnecessary. But in many cases, you know, I don't want to go as far as to say saving people's lives, but it could come pretty damn close to it. So I understand that, and you have choices, and everything's fine. With the ratings for video games, at least in the US, the ESRB, I think, is the only place, right? You can't go anywhere
That's
else.
right.
And at the end of the day, if it's, you know, if you're a parent and your kid's playing a first person shooter, you know, make sure the game isn't too terrible. And if it's a
Of
cartoon, if it's a
course.
Mario Brothers, you're fine. Let's be honest. I don't know about you, but I was a kid. I could find even pre-internet anything I wanted. So it's like it was a
Oh
lot
yeah.
harder back then. So my first exposure to a violent video game was not shocking. This is not at
No.
all.
No.
So I don't know. I don't really know who this is helping, other than the original. creation of it, which basically was to keep Congress away from the video game world, make sure that
Yep.
the government didn't step in and censor, which that's obviously a very good thing. But
Absolutely.
I know it was a really long way of saying what's the point of these idiots? Why are we still paying them a ton of money, and what do they do that gives back to the community? Because UL very clearly helps the planet. Make sure you don't
Hmm.
plug two devices in at the same time and burn your house down. What's the ESRB doing that requires $10,000 a game?
Pretty sure that it's just to fill their pockets at this point.
Right.
There doesn't seem to be that much benefit to it outside of that.
Yeah, and I've learned as the older I get, the more I realize I do have a damn the man attitude towards life. But I try to keep it in check, and I try to shut my mouth about it unless I really, really feel strongly about it. But I genuinely can't think of a reason why they
No,
should and could be charging that unless somebody's pockets are getting lined.
exactly. And we'll see how this plans out because I've already noticed, like just shopping around here in Europe, there's more games that have physical copies here than in the US. So I'm wondering if there's like a difference in like the rating systems over here are potentially like I don't know what the cost is, but
Hmm.
I'm wondering if it's less because I wouldn't think that these smaller publishers and indie games could show up as easily as they do if it cost 10 grand to do it,
Yeah.
kind of thing, you know? So, and it's
And now that people have gotten used to it, now that's 20 plus years, all of these games need to go through some kind of certification to get on these app stores. Why
it's
can't
true.
the companies do it themselves? And to be honest, it's not like you'd have to worry about them sneaking stuff in. Based on children of all time, it's like if you think maybe it's PG-13, but maybe it's R. If you call it R, more kids are going to want to buy it. So let's just let's just err to the side of caution and make everything. So I
Yeah.
don't. Hopefully this will cause enough noise to make people rethink this.
Yeah, I certainly hope so.
So, what do you have coming up next? You said you have the Jaguar episode you're working on, but what else have you been digging into? What could people expect to see coming in the future?
Okay, so like I said, I've been a little bit behind on the retro releases just because of Xbox One X and fall release schedule, so I just don't have the time. The next one I'm planning to do though is an episode on Rare.
Oh, cool.
So basically, I guess a few months ago, I spent some time talking with five guys that used to work at Rare that are now at Playtonic, and basically filmed about 2.5 hours of interviews and such with those guys. So I'm going to do sort of a documentary style thing on some of the technical details and creation that went into some of those games. So like, Kevin Bayless, for instance, who's a super nice fellow. He was there designing the original Donkey Kong Country 3D renders, and he kind of gives a lot of details on the whole process of how they even got those SGI stations in the first place and what it was like working on them, and
Hmm.
how they even came to the point where they were making Donkey Kong. And there's a lot of cool stories in there, so I'm really excited to kind of put that together and make it into something interesting.
Geez, I can't
So,
wait.
so that should be
I
fun.
distinctly remember when that thing came out. There was
Hmm.
remember Funko Land?
Oh yeah.
So, I got to know one of the guys there. Little annoying 10-year-old me goes to guy's like a college kid, and
Yeah.
somebody said, "Hey, that guy buys Master System games because Funko Land doesn't deal in that." So been buying and selling off of him, and we're all
Nice.
nerds, right? So all of a sudden, I'm there with my mom, and he's got like a hoodie on. He's like, "Hey, come here." And, like conspiratorially, and even my parents were really strict, but even at this point, we're a bunch of nerds in a video game store. My mom didn't even blink an eye. She's like, "I don't know what." He walks over and he pulls out two copies of Donkey Kong Country that wasn't supposed to be released for 3 more months. And I
Oh
was just,
no.
what, where did you
What
get
is
that?
this?
And he said, that girl over there, her dad works for Nintendo, and she doesn't even have a Super Nintendo. She's the rebellious kid that would rather have a Genesis. And Funkoland wouldn't let her trade him in because it's not a real game yet. So he bought both copies and was like, "You gotta sell one to me." So he sold me one of them, and whatever I had planned on buying, I just traded everything in that day for cash and bought it and got it home.
That's
And for like, I was like the king of nerds for a good week and a half because people were just starting to read about it, the releases in
that's
magazines, and here we were
incredible.
playing it. Yeah, I couldn't
Dude.
freaking believe that happened to me.
Yeah, and it was such a mind-blowing game at the time. So to get it early like that, wow, that's insane.
Yeah, I remember the first time we loaded it up, I was arguing with my cousin Scott, like, I don't understand how the Super Nintendo could look like this, because we didn't know what pre-rendered graphics were, and we're looking at the
Right.
box, like, well, it says it's like a 4 meg cartridge. Does that mean there's more room to put stuff in the, like, yeah, it was what a crazy game. I can't wait
Oh
to
man.
see that interview. I bet you that's going to be
Yeah,
a
yeah.
killer
I'm
one.
excited. I can't wait. So hopefully by the end of this year.
So,
So
how'd you get into all this stuff anyway? I mean, do you have a game dev background? Like, how'd you step into
um
this world?
I have a programming background and I worked in the automotive industry for years.
Hmm.
And when I moved to Europe in 2013 with my wife, I had to quit my job in the U.S. because she basically moved her job back over here,
Mhm.
and she's from France originally, so she wanted to come back to Europe. And so I basically then around that same time, my boss posted sort of a "Hey, we're looking for another guy" kind of thing on the Eurogamer.net website for Digital Foundry. So I just applied to that and kind of took a test, so to speak, did some things, and I kind of got on as a freelancer at first.
Mhm.
And I did some freelancing for a while with them, and then eventually got hired on full time, and now that's the job I do.
That's pretty
So,
awesome.
and I do it all from home.
Yeah, I have one of those still. That's coming to an end, so I'm kind of bummed about that because I love
Oh,
the way my ADHD works. Some days I have to just focus on one thing, and other days I got two screens here, something over there, got my guitar in my
yeah,
hand recording something. So I can't really do
I
that in an
know.
office. So
No, definitely not.
and
Yeah, for me, it's like working from home is the thing that makes stuff like the DF Retro possible. Since I
yeah.
have like my whole console set up, or everything ready to go, I couldn't bring all that into an office very easily. So, and of course, I'm using the G SCART for that, which
Yeah.
I know you guys love as well.
Uh,
So it's great because then I can play on the PVM and then send the other output to the capture device and get all the footage I need, and there we go.
what are you
So
using as a capture device?
so I've gravitated recently from I kind of moved. I still use it sometimes, but I moved from the FrameMeister to the OSSC, and so I pipe the G-SCART to the OSSC, and then I take that, and so I have. I think mostly for the OSSC, I'm using the DataPath Vision like DVI DL,
Same exact
which
setup as mine. All of
so
that, all
yeah,
three of those.
I've
Yeah.
been using the DataPath card. That's the first capture card I got back in 2013 because it could do 1080p capture, and at the time it was a very expensive card.
It's
But
like $750 or something, right?
yeah, it was insane. And since then, I've added. Now I got four capture devices, including a standalone one, which has its own screen, and you slot SSDs into it, and that's what I use for 4K capture.
That
That
is
can also
killer.
capture HDR, which is killer. So, but working with HDR is a whole nother thing. but
Yeah.
but yeah, for the retro setup, it sounds like you're doing exactly the same thing then, and it works really well.
Yeah, I've been lucky enough to make friends with all the guys that do what we do, and the things the things that we all come to the same conclusion on from completely different paths. It's so
It's amazing.
reassuring. I'm so used to looking at Super Nintendo. I always take my captures and zoom in on Link, and that's how I'm able to tell because I just know how it looks. I could probably just close my
Exactly.
eyes and
Yep.
imagine it.
Exactly.
So that's how I found the data path, and it's compatible with everything you throw at it.
I love it. Yeah,
Yeah,
and it's DVIA and D, so you can kind of throw
right, right.
anything you want at it. Exactly, in all different resolutions, and
Yep.
that's awesome.
Voltar even just did a board so that you just connected it. Imagine an OSSC, but that was pass through only, so that you have
Mhm.
all the inputs, VGA component, everything else. So if you wanted to do in their native quality, so yeah, that's amazing. But when
Oh
the
yeah, I
other
saw
guys
that board.
started
Yeah.
working on it too, like Steve from HD RetroVision was doing some tests on it, and he's looking at the color bars, and I think one of the guys put a scope on. But we all just tackled it from a completely different perspective and came
That's
to the same
funny.
conclusion. Like, yeah, this is the best bang for the buck today.
Which codec do you use for the capture?
So the things that I normally do, the things that are my wheelhouse, are the still captures, and I just use the Vision
Ah,
software that comes with it.
okay.
And we're all of us, Firebrand X as well, are now in a discussion of trying to figure out the best way to do the video captures. And the only issue is we're trying to figure it out for retro games first, and then because some of the newer ones it depends on the color space, you have to reset everything. But we're trying to figure out what the best thing to do through the OSSC is at the moment. What do you use
Cool.
though?
I use a lossless video compressor called UT Video,
Hmm.
and it's a lossless codec, so the file size is massive. Like an hour of footage could be like 100 gigs or something. So, but the idea is that because it's lossless, you're getting a perfect representation of the signal. So there's no extra compression on top of that. So although the end result I output and put on YouTube is going to be a compressed MP4, all of the source material is lossless video, so that it's always going to be pristine up until the point where I re-encode it as an MP4. So it kind
Gotcha.
of minimizes the amount of compression you get in the final product, I think, and it's also necessary for our frame rate tools and stuff like that, just to use lossless video. So that kind of works out, but it does take a lot of space.
Yeah. What software do you use with UT Video? Do you run like XSplit OBS, or do you have a dedicated
um,
software?
I just use Amarok TV.
Ah, everybody was saying that. Okay, I just making notes for this. UT Video and Amarok TV. The last time I played with it was years ago, and it didn't seem very user friendly. So I got to jump back into that.
Oh, it's not the most user friendly, that's for sure, but it works really well once you get it configured. So
Gotcha. Well, that'll be a project for a weekend coming up, but I am
exactly.
definitely looking forward to getting video captures of things and really jumping into that, because the stills have been fine for what I've been doing so far, but I gotta step it up a bit. So,
Cool.
well, man, I just thank you so much for doing this. This was a blast. I gotta have
Oh,
you
of
back
course,
on
man. I
again
love
some
it.
other time.
Anytime.
So they could find you Digital Foundry and then Eurogamer.
Yeah, just go to eurogamer.net/digitalfoundry or youtube.com/digitalfoundry, and you can find me on Twitter at Dark1X.
Gotcha. I will have links down below for everybody else, and I guess see you guys next time.
See you later.